In order.
Shall be late.
Everybody stand for the pledge, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Fleece.
Present.
Friend. Hooper.
Here.
Inman.
Here.
Maxbauer. Here. Richardson.
Here.
Stepka.
Here.
Wheelock.
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Thomas.
Here.
And Linda, Commissioner Friend sent a note, she'll be a few minutes late.
All right. Public comment. Would you read the rules, please?
Any person shall be permitted to address a meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which is required to be open to the public under the provisions of the Michigan Open Meeting Act as amended. Public comment shall be carried out in accordance with the following board rules and procedures. A, any person wishing to address the board shall state his or her name and address. B, no person shall be allowed to speak more than once on the same matter, excluding time needed to answer commissioners' questions. The chairperson shall control the amount of time each person shall be allowed to speak, which shall not exceed 3 minutes. 1, chairperson may at his or her discretion extend the amount of time any person is allowed to speak.
Thank you. Who wants to be first? Identify yourself, please. Whoever you might be.
Glenn Lyle, East Bay Township Supervisor, also a board member of Metro. There's quite a few email floating around, suggestions that appropriations for the education for Metro be cut or removed. And I guess you've got memo or letters from different members of Metro Board, so I'm not going to go into all that. What I'd like to address is Metro has been in charge of the educational program for 9 months. And when Metro got into it, it was told that in 1 year you come back and give a report. I guess I'm kind of taken back by the fact we're even talking about cutting it. And the worst part is we're talking about cutting it to take 42% of the funds that we're going to cut and give to somebody else to do basically what Metro is already doing. What I would ask that it does not be cut, it continue and go into next year. You'll have a full year to take a look at the program and see what it accomplished. That money had been given to the combination of Metro and Rural, where Rural ran the educational program, I believe, for quite a few years, and I don't have the total number. I don't know if anybody was held accountable or not, but that is this board's responsibility to hold those entities accountable. And I would expect that at the end of the year, Metro would be held accountable. And if they did not fulfill what the obligations that this board thought, that you would change and do something else. But I would suggest that give a full year, not start a program, get 9 months into it. And I think it's probably so much further ahead as far as what they're accomplishing in the 9 months than what it did in the last 5 years or 6 years. So I guess all I'm asking for is to let it go, put the funding in for it, let it go another year, and evaluate it after a year. Thank you.
Who next?
Good afternoon. My name is Pat Parker. I'm the Fire Chief of Grand Traverse Metro Fire Department. We've been the recipient of a grant from the county since start of last year for $88,000. But the combined fire department of Metro and Rural have enjoyed the county support since 1980, when the county fire department broke apart into Metro and Rural. And it broke apart into an organization called Grand Traverse Admin, and that admin is a group that the county funded primarily for secretarial help. In 2003, that money was earmarked for public education. We hired a full-time public educator, both Metro and both Rural, as well as a representative from your board and other outside boards govern that. I think that the program has expanded greatly, nicely since then. When that public educator decided to resign and become the fire chief at Blair, it created an opening for someone to run the program. And that's when Metro stepped up and started running the program. And I think the statistics will prove that we've made huge gains this year in new target audiences that we've never had before. So I think that the money that the county does give the fire department is going to hit target audiences such as senior citizens, the handicapped, as well as the children. Now, a question has come up, and there's been emails around of the fact that you're looking at possibly cutting the portion that goes to Metro and giving it to another organization to enhance their programs. And the other organization is a great organization. I think there were comments earlier in the year about the fact that there's duplication, and I think that we had addressed that, and in fact, we actually complement each other's programs. We have had a senior slip and fall program since the early 2000s, since 2003, and there's been comments that we're duplicating what another organization could do. So I would just also, first of all, like to thank you for your support and hope that we could count on your continued support. We've expanded this program to all five fire departments now, so Blair, Metro, Rural, the city, and Peninsula Township are all beneficiaries of the county's money, and we're providing programs out in an outreach to these other fire departments. Without this money, fire and life safety education probably would cease or be greatly diminished. Thank you.
Chuck Corn, Garfield Township Supervisor and a member of the Metro Board. I think my friends have stolen all my thunder, but I would like to add that I truly believe that this authority, which was formed less than a year ago, is doing a very good job of getting the most they can for the money they have. And I hope you'll consider increasing the amount. Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, we'll move along. Oh,
No, there's some more.
Herb, you're getting slow in your old age.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Herb Lemkool, 907 Meadow Drive. I've come here just to bring you an update as to what 211 is doing, and hopefully that you would continue the funding for 211. Last year, you folks made a commitment for $20,000 for 211. I would hope that you continue doing that, and we thank you for that support. Since that has happened, we put together a 7-county coalition that is going to be putting together 211. Consumers Power has donated $300,000 to the state of Michigan for 211 to be able to implement those for counties that are willing to put into a collaborated effort to be able to do so. So that will go to the Muskegon Call Center to help them to be able to put that together. That's about 15 cents per population for people in the Grand Traverse County. And as you know, it's going to cost about $1 per population for 211 to be put into implementation for the county here. We have applied to Rotary Charities for a planning grant, because one of the things you said that you need to have is a business plan for this to happen, to make sure that it's going to be taken care of, not for just a year or 2 years, but maybe 6 or 10 years. So we are trying to put that together. That grant went in this last week, and hopefully North Sky then will have that will help us to implement that, or put that together, so we have a regular plan that we can implement and put together for you, so that you will be willing to give us the other $20,000. Steve Wade from United Way has put together a budget for that. Did he send any of that information out to any of the commissioners? I don't know if anybody got anything.
I did get an email.
You did get something from him?
Yeah.
Good.
It's just a letter of support, though.
Okay, and so I think that's really important. I think the other thing is that at the last collaboration meeting, Fred Kiesler got up and made the comment that he wishes that Grand Traverse County had 211, because with this flu epidemic, that would be a way for him to be able to get the message out, to be able to get the people to be able to call 911 get it, or excuse me, 211, and be able to get answers as to what's happening, how they can handle it, and where they need to go for those services. So I'm here just to ask you for your continued support, and hopefully that, I understand that your budgets are going to be rather difficult to do, but I think in these times of need, I think it's really important that 211 be a critical piece of the puzzle that you put together for funding for Grand Traverse County. And I thank you very much. Any questions?
Thanks, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Jim Teller, Fire Chief, City of Traverse City. Just a quick moment to echo the sentiments of Chief Parker and Mr. Korn in support of the public education and fire safety effort that they've developed. Just yesterday, I wrote a letter of recommendation in support of NFPA program that we have a chance to implement here, not only in the county but also in the city. It's called Risk Watch. It's something that we've been trying to do with with the city fire education effort that we've had for many years. We just haven't had the time, the manpower, the resources to implement it, and it's not just fire safety, but it's in several other areas of where children are getting hurt and unfortunately killed. And this program just seems to be building momentum right now, getting some traction and getting its feet under it. And I would really like to ask that you at least give it another year to grow and get strong, and maybe then go out on its own. I do know that when I sat in on some organizational meetings, they were talking about funding from outside resources, bringing in coalition partners from the private sector and those types of things, and that takes time. The Risk Watch program, as I described, they're looking at 2 pilot schools, one Blair Elementary in Blair Township and Willow Hill here in the city. And I support that effort. I think it's a really good way to build a partnership to get this program out countywide. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out to the board members, I put at your place also on the fire issue letters from Wayne Clatter, Chuck Korn, and Rob Manigold, so you all have those. And then there's the letter that was an email to Larry Inman from Steve Wade, and you all have copies of that on the 211.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Item 3, continued budget discussion. Start with capital improvements.
Well, I just followed through on the list that you had from last time, and I kind of left the items on there that were on there. We can take these in any order you want. In terms of the capital improvements, I gave you all copies based on some comments made of some possible appropriations in capital improvements, and I have other copies or additional copies of them if there's any further need to discuss capital improvements. Remember, the budget has none in it, and there seemed to be some sentiment on the part of the board to go ahead and actually do something with capital improvements and perhaps use the capital improvement fund to fund those. So if you want to talk about those more, I do have that.
Dennis, could you, do you have extra copies of that page listed all the capital improvements? Can you get that to us?
I have copies of the ones that Dean and I recommended to you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, while that's being passed around, I just wanted to point out that for those who might not know, Commissioner Stepka had surgery Tuesday, and he's having a slight complication as a result of it, so he had to go into the, he was just called by his doctor to go into the clinic, so he gave his apologies, but he had to go in and have it checked out, so.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
So Dennis, I want to make sure I understand this. These are the list of items that have been identified that we need to make certain improvements here in Grand Traverse County, and we have been reserving funds in a capital improvement fund from the tax shift. Is it from the tax shift income or the differential that
No.
we put money into the capital improvement
Well,
fund?
this is just money that you've been setting aside from your general fund into a capital improvement fund.
Right.
If you recall, if you look at, in my budget summary, attachment D is a list of all the capital improvement requests that were made. That's all the capital improvements. But there was some comment made during one of our budget hearings about perhaps seeing some recommendations from us about things that we feel are essential to fund if we're going to fund capital. Remember that our budget recommendation did not eliminate capital improvements. It only said, look at them one at a time next year and fund them out of your capital improvement program. There seemed to be some sentiment among commissioners to do that now as opposed to do it during the year next year. So Dean and I got together, and this list we just passed out of the most critical things we feel should be funded if you decide to fund capital now. Of course, it's your choice what you fund, and we are recommending that these be funded from the Capital Improvement Program Fund.
Okay. Can you give me a total on this page, and can you give me the dollar amount that is in the capital improvement fund balance?
There's a tab in your budget book with this, should have the summary.
Just with this right here? Just this page?
No, for the capital
No, I
improvement
just want
fund.
this page.
You've got, at the end of 2009, you've got about $1.2 million in your capital improvement.
1.2 million?
1.2 million, and if you look at the list of capital recommendations that they gave you, all of them excluding the ones that are included in the recommended budget, so excluding the ones that have the single asterisk, all of the remaining ones total $977,000.
And you're going to be adding $1 million to your capital improvement fund next year. So it'll be on the, we figured when we talked last week or 2 weeks ago, we figured it's on the order of 2.4 to 2.5 million that's in there.
So you believe that this list here is critical?
No, what I'm saying is they are the most critical.
Most critical.
It's up to the board to decide, and they are in priority order as far as Dean and I believe. We consulted with Danny Brown about these to our facilities director. These are the order we believe them to be most critical. If you want to do any of these, it's up to you to decide which ones you want to do.
But we don't have to do these as part of the budget.
You don't have to do this, you don't have to do any of them, or you can do all of them.
How do these compare to your capital plan? Through,
These are all
The
on the
planning department.
these are all on the capital plan. You mean our 5-year maintenance replacement plan?
I'm talking about your capital improvement plan that John Sykes developed.
Capital improvement plan relates primarily to new facilities and property acquisition. So this really isn't impacted by that.
But this would be the source of funds for those things, though, correct?
You're talking about the capital improvement plan, which is our plan on how we're going to develop facilities in our system.
Yep.
That is not directly related to the capital improvement program where we are setting money aside to do capital improvements.
But what I'm asking is how are you funding your capital plan?
We're not funding the capital plan. The plan is a planning document that identifies where we're going to develop facilities in the future.
Right.
We haven't, that
You
does
haven't
not include...
identified funding sources
It does
for
not
that.
include component of that. For example, the jail, which is recommended to be looked at Lafreniere, is about a $45 million project. Haven't identified that.
Sonny?
Dennis, coming out of this capital improvement budget, or capital improvement fund, we still have bond payments to make on the road construction that we financed last year, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that'll be
After
over
that-
and above this list that we already
After that,
committed.
we have about 2.3 to 2.5 million left over.
After the road bonds are already
For-
paid?
no,
Or
no.
for next year?
For next year, after we pay the 460 or 470,000, that's where we're going to be about. This whole totals $1,252,000.
Okay, well, going back to your 2.3, 2.4, that's before we then take out the road bond payment for next year.
Oh, it's after the road.
No,
bonds.
After-
I believe it's after the road
After the
bond.
2010? Is
Yeah.
that correct, Dean?
I'm not sure where we've gone with the question, but at the end of 2009, the capital improvement fund will have a balance of $1,213,000. And we did provide this, I believe, at the last meeting.
You did.
We provided the uses of those funds over time, and the tab in your budget manual that does have the budget for 2010, which includes the road bonds, which is an obligation that we have for a few years going forward. But the total budget for next year is set at $1 million. The $1 million appropriation comes from the general fund, and the main expenditure components are the road improvement, our 50% share, which is $437,000. We did identify the generator the jail generator, which is the first item on your list in that budget, so that's the $125,000. And then we had some other funds to round out the total budget of $1 million, which included some funding for the records management system.
So, Dean, give us your number of what you think's available next year after we pay the road bonds, before we do any of this stuff, including the generator.
1.2 million, the fund balance that you would have at the end of 2009, because we have not budgeted a fund balance in this fund. You would have 1.2 million.
Well,
Okay, plus $1 million
Plus
minus
$1 million.
$450,000, or 1,750, right?
Correct.
1.75 million?
Correct.
What is line 992 contingency in your capital improvement fund?
A contingency line item is generally used to balance a budget. Revenues do need to equal expenditures, and it's simply an item that has not been identified with a specific expenditure. It's primarily a balancing item. It's money that you could budget for other uses once you have identified what that use is.
That's a rather large contingency.
Yeah, but the record management software is a rather large expenditure also.
Yes.
I guess I want to point that out. When it comes to the record management system, you know, you're going to, actually, a presentation to move to the next step is going to come to public safety next week. Okay? But if you decided you were going to fund that, you know, I can't tell you yet whether I would ask you to fund the whole $650,000, or I think we need to look at other options, like a lease purchase of the system, you know, and evaluate the options before we commit that kind of money to it. So we're showing it to you as a need, and I haven't talked with Dean about that, but I certainly want to get a proposal or look at, you know, loaning it to ourselves and funding it to ourselves over time, just like the way we did with the road commission. And I just want to compare that to the cost of committing the whole $650,000 at one time. We may be able to save some money, or it may end up in the long run being cheaper for us rather than using that whole $650,000. So I wanted to put it in here as a placeholder to say we think this is a very important project, but I can't tell you right now that I'd want you to commit a whole $650,000 to it. Of course, if you decided to, we could always put it back in the fund, because it stays in the fund anyway if we decided to buy it over time. So I just wanted to make that point to you. I don't know that that's something that we're going to ask you to do in 1 year.
Do you have any kind of estimates of, if we were to buy it, what the estimates would be on yearly maintenance?
$75,000 the first year, and in the fifth year it goes to $90,000.
And you have no idea what a lease would cost?
I do not. And I want to point out that that number I just gave you, Commissioner, would be offset by the money we would save on existing maintenance contracts, and I don't have an idea of what that number is in the various departments. So it might be 10, 20, 30,000, I don't know what that is. So it won't be a net of that much, but it'll be some portion of that.
Well, I guess my feeling on this, Dennis, if I can express it, is that since this is, you know, a separate fund that's not part of our general operating budget, that, you know, that we're moving forward and trying to make some determination by the end of October, or October board meeting, that I'd like to take some time, and if it's through the committee system or however the board would like to handle it, and just take these one-on-one, discuss them, and make a decision on the merit and the need, and just take them one at a time, and if we need to address it at a committee level or a special Ways and Means meeting or whatever, and take our time and to just actually go through each one of these items and talk about where we're at with each one of them, and talk about whether we fund them now or later.
I think Dean and I are fine with it. That was actually our recommendation in the budget.
Okay, all right.
But some commissioners expressed they'd like to see it now, so I just provided it to you.
Yeah,
But
all
sure,
right.
it can wait. There's no rush on that.
Right.
So then we would be funding the jail generator and the imaging implementation continuation, because that's in the budget currently.
But it's coming out of the CIP fund, so if
Okay,
you
right,
say to us
okay.
today, we're not funding any of it, we're going to review them one at a time.
Okay.
We'll just make the adjustment when we make technical adjustments, and you can look at it next month or next year.
And I asked this question in
that's
one
a
of
great
the, either the budget department meeting or one of the question and answer session, but what criteria, I'd like to see some criteria developed so that this doesn't become just, you know, who comes to the subcommittee first and who has the best,
The loudest voice?
the loudest voice, the best, you know, horse and, is it dog and pony, horse and pony, whatever show,
Dog and
you know,
pony.
that,
Yeah.
thank you. So could we develop some criteria in which to evaluate these potential capital expenditures?
Well, I think that's what staff's done. The jail generator, I happen to have personal knowledge on that. That was a used piece of equipment that they bought from surplus, and if I'm not mistaken, it was installed in 1988. And it was very old at the time, and I think if Danny Brown was here, he could probably speak to the age of it. So staff has said to us, and not a loud voice or anything, but just evaluating all aspects of need, because without a generator in the jail, if the power goes out, you can't even open the doors. But anyway, so they do have some criteria by which they establish this list.
Well, obviously, because those are two of them that they included to be in, that they said, you know, we definitely feel that those should be in. I guess I'm more speaking about the remaining expenditures.
At 125,000, is that for a new generator or a rebuild?
New.
So we could save money there.
It's possible. I'd have to get Danny in here to talk to you about the merits of a used one versus a new one versus a rebuild.
It worked last time for 28 years, 20,
That's
Whatever.
correct. Actually, I don't think it was rebuilt. It was just given to us. We bought it from the military.
Yeah, it was surplus, and, but what Dick, I think, is getting at, you have companies out there that lease them or rent them.
Right.
And they don't have a lot of hours on, we might be, or demo,
Yep.
may be able to save some bucks that
Hey,
way.
Peterson Machinery.
like it might kick on once a year.
Right.
Having recently purchased a large welder generator under those circumstances, though, I can tell you it was 6 weeks before I got it working properly, and a lot of headaches along the way, too, because even though it had very little hours on it, it hadn't been maintained well.
And how much did you save?
$4,000.
That's a
In terms of Commissioner
$121,000
Friend,
saving.
in terms of Commissioner Friend's question, the main criteria we use is the 5-year capital improvement plan, the 5-year maintenance replacement plan that you adopt. We look at the life, we look at the engineering specs and the life of the equipment, we look at the maintenance records, we look at a number of things, we meet with the departments and with Danny Brown to evaluate what has the most critical need. But I would be more than happy to work with the board for you to identify for me criteria that's important for you, and then we'll put it into some kind of an analysis for you to, because there's no reason for me to use my criteria, because this is my criteria. If you have other criteria you want to look at, I'd be glad to work with you to develop them, and then we'll reevaluate them and rank them according to your criteria.
Okay, long-term for the CIP fund, let's see, in '07 you put in $500,000, then $750,000, then $875,000, for a total so far of $2,125,000. Now, you're planning on putting in $1 million next year.
Yes.
So what, beyond that, what are we looking at?
What's the next
Well-
year after that?
Well, we're eventually building that up to a $1.5 million annual appropriation.
By 2014.
Correct, to be approximately equal to the revenue sharing that we receive from the state of Michigan.
We changed, if you recall, earlier this year when we went in and made budget amendments because of the loss of about $500,000 in interest revenue this year, we went back and one of the things we said, rather than put the whole $1 million in this year, we dropped it $150,000 to $850,000, which means next year would be $1 million and the year after that would be $1,150,000. Is that how we're going to do it, Dean?
Correct, it was $125,000 reduction.
Excuse me.
And we were increasing it by $250,000, which was a little too aggressive based on the time that we have with our revenue sharing reserve
Would
fund.
that, I just want to be clear, because I'm not clear. Would that be up into 2014 and then that ceases, or you're looking?
I would say that's going to be your decision to make, but our plan was that it would cease because we made the assumption that we'll never see any revenue sharing.
Right.
If we see $1 million or $500,000 or $1.5 million in revenue sharing, you'll have to make a determination on how to use that. My suggestion would be, we look at the budget, but if we're getting an extra $1 million or $1.5 million that we didn't anticipate getting, you put it into the capital improvement program to keep building that fund and eventually get to the point where your capital items in the budget are funded from that fund as opposed from general fund dollars. That would be my suggestion.
But that would be a great situation if indeed that revenue sharing were reinstated.
It would be wonderful.
which,
Absolutely. But of course, we didn't plan for that because we don't know.
Right?
What's the last year that we have the road bond payment?
It's a 5-year deal, isn't it?
5 years, 2008 was our first year, or 9 was our first year?
2013.
Was 8?
It's a 5-year issue. This is the first year in '09 that we made a principal payment, so
14.
Okay. So 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 will be the last.
I think 13.
13, yes, you're right.
So, does anybody want to do anything with this item?
Well, I thought we were going to skip the capital improvement for now and move on to the budget.
Well, I guess.
That's fine.
I mean, my suggestion is that, I'd like to hear the story behind each one of these items and bring Danny Brown in and bring in the department head, and we'll just do an evaluation on each line item and
But we can do
call
that,
call a different meeting.
we can do that after the first of the year.
Sure.
We're in no
Yeah.
hurry.
Yeah, I mean, I would be fine
Mr.
with
Chairman,
that.
reference the capital improvement budget. 2 items were identified and funded in the budget that was proposed by our finance director and our county administrator to be funded in the 2010 budget. One is the jail generator and one is the imaging implementation continuation. As I understand that, those 2 items have been recommended in our budget, and I would move that we fund those out of the capital improvement fund.
Support. Been moved and supported, further discussion? Except you gotta look at it, you gotta look at a rebuilt one.
Yeah, I would, that's all I was
Yeah,
going to say.
but I'm not-
At least look
I'm not gonna-
at least look at the possibility of.
I like those
saving money on that.
$4,000 ones.
You won't find that.
Okay,
You want to, is that your?
I have no problem with them looking at a rebuilt generator or something like that, but I'm just saying, fund the jail generator and the imaging implementation out of the capital improvement funds in the 2010 budget.
2010 capital improvement budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait, what, though, it's already in,
It's already
In the capital
it's
improvement.
in this budget that we have prepared and presented to us.
further discussion? All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Motion passes.
I had one other question about that before we move on, if that's all right. Capital improvements, I mean. Dennis, you had listed the 6 sheriff's patrol cars.
Yes.
It's not typical to put automobiles in the capital improvement budget, is it? Or is it?
I think it's perfectly appropriate. We've never put
I'm not
anything,
saying it's inappropriate, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, is it typical of what
we've
done?
never put anything in the capital, this is the first time we're putting anything into that capital improvement
Oh,
program.
okay, all right.
The other 2 times that it was used, as Dean mentioned, it was through a separate appropriation during the course of a year where you said, we want to do this, and you took the money out of there. So,
I like to remind, the point of the capital improvement is to grow it and not to spend it.
Well, that's the thing that I think the subcommittee that hears a lot of these will have to keep in mind next year, because this is, other than those 2 items, it's $977,000 worth of things.
Yeah.
And you're looking at the end of next year having 1.75 total. So if you did everything and you put everything in that you're supposed to, you would only be sitting at $800 and some thousand dollars or something like that. And I think it's important to look at how you're going to fund these things going on, how you're going to generate funds to move into there. As you heard, the funds that they're putting in there now eventually will cease unless they reinstitute revenue sharing. The other thing is, the plan for the buildings and how the county operates on a longer term, that's not being funded or planned for at right now at all. I mean, it's being planned for, but there's no
Funding.
funding.
Well, the only thing I guess I would add to that is the fact that you also remember that as part of this 2010 budget, we suspended the 5-year ongoing maintenance plan, which a number of these items that are identified on this capital improvement list would actually be in the 5-year maintenance plan, but we suspended it for 2010 because of funding issues. So a number of these items will be back in next year's facility maintenance plan.
Probably should wait a year.
Okay, everybody happy?
Yep.
Next item. Got $70,000 for the pavilions and the Commission on Aging.
What now?
Well, that's kind of a moot point, isn't it?
You made a decision at
We have to find
a
the
separate
money.
meeting to approve giving the pavilions and the Commission on Aging their prorated share of the interest money that we earn. That was separate from this county budget, so now you have a $70,000 hole in the county budget that you have to address.
Yes, we do.
Where are we gonna find it?
You've suggested the pool and an interest revenue adjustment?
Pardon me?
If you were gonna ask me, I'd suggest anything that has to do with Parks and Rec, because that is not a...
I'm
that's
ready.
not a- That's not a place where we have to spend money.
I'm ready. There is so much fat in that budget, it is unreal.
Well, do you want to go there?
Dick, you have a recommendation?
Do I have a recommendation?
Yeah, you have a memo that you, your letter you
No.
sent us?
Have a recommendation.
Does staff have any recommendations?
Ask Bill where it's gonna come from.
Bill?
He's the interest fella.
Not popping up to the mic.
You want a copy of your recommendation?
I've got it right in front of me.
I was gonna say, you know, now's the time to talk about it.
You see how things change so rapidly?
Well, do you want me to make a recommendation?
Yeah, go
I'd be
ahead.
more than happy to. I suggest you cut the pool budget by $50,000. We've talked to Bill Rokas, and Bill has indicated that he could take the interest up by $25,000 next year. 21 of that would be available to offset this, so I believe that would be $70,000.
What do you mean take the interest up?
He believes, based on what's currently going on, that we could raise the estimated revenue from interest next year by $25,000. But now you have to remember that a portion of that goes to the pavilions, and a portion of that will have to go to the Commission on Aging. So we've calculated that you could raise it $25,000, which will net the county about $21,000. And if you cut the pool budget, the staffing budget, by $50,000, that will be $71,000.
Dennis, I have to
Could I
interrupt.
finish? That'd be $71,000, and that would cover the interest that you owe to the two agencies.
No.
When you take a look, not just at the pool budget, but at the Parks and Rec budget, $16,000 is in there for travel and conventions, for a staff of 2. $16,000.
Okay, where are we?
Yes, absolutely, you can cut staff. Quite honestly, I think you can cut that budget more than $50,000.
Well, that's not, we don't need to. Maybe it's something you phase out over a couple of years.
You need 1 lifeguard on duty per 75 people. You have 1 lifeguard on duty from 5 a.m. until 9 a.m. with no one else there. The rest of the day, the place is packed with staff. Absolutely, there's room in the staff budget to cut.
That's why I was recommending we cut it by $50,000.
Absolutely, and I would agree with you, Dennis, but honestly, $16,000 for travels and conventions?
You can cut that
For the entire parks budget?
Commissioner,
For-
you can cut that with something else, too. I have no problem with that. That's your choice.
So we can discuss even further changes, but I guess what he's looking at right now is for the $70,000 for the interest being shifted
I think you
to
can
those
take it all out
entities.
of the pool budget. Truly.
In
And
terms
Parks
of...
and Rec, actually Parks and Rec.
In the general fund, it's an easy budget adjustment to make because there's an appropriation, it's a transfer out, it's one line item. When you get into the detail of the Parks and Rec fund, that's where you have to go in and identify where you're going to make those cuts, as Commissioner Max Bauer said, whether it's travel, conventions and conferences, or in staffing, that's where you have to do the detail work. I agree with Dennis and Commissioner Max Bauer. I think we can identify 50,000 there fairly easy.
So I would make the motion that we reduce the pool budget by $50,000 and increase the interest revenues estimate by $25,000 to accommodate for that 70, do I have the numbers right on there? I have 71 there.
25,000 interest.
For the difference in the Commission on Aging and the pavilion's interest. And that's not to say you couldn't go back and cut more out. I'm just saying at a minimum this amount for that.
Support.
Yeah, I don't think we should whack away at it too much.
Yeah, all at once.
Well,
But
If it's
okay, let me just bring this up, all right? $10,000 is in here next year for 2 new chemical outbuildings. You know, we've gone how many years without these outbuildings? Why do we need 2 of them in next year's budget? There's an incredible amount of fat in here.
I would disagree with you on that, but I would also comment that we gave you all an opportunity to ask you which departments you wanted to come talk to, and nobody asked to have the Parks Department come here and answer your questions. I'm not in a position to answer every individual question. I wish you would have asked him to come and make a presentation to you, and then you could have asked these questions, and he could explain to you why. But I'm not going to be able to do that here and answer those questions.
And I understand that, Dennis, but please also understand that we did not get this budget and have enough time to review every single department.
I understand
And the
that.
P is at the end of the list.
I understand that, but you could have just as easily asked me yesterday to make sure that he was here today to answer questions that you had.
Well, I
Or you
asked
could have
him
brought
around
him
the
to the
week
meeting
here.
before that, or the meeting before that. All I'm saying is, if you didn't have enough time and you thought there might be issues, we've had lots of issues with the Parks Board. You could have very easily told me, hey, we may need them, have them come. And we had other people come here that were there for about 2 seconds, and you sent them home. So I just think we could have done that, and I'm glad to bring him to talk about these details. But I'm not going to be able to dispute or argue your comment that these 2 buildings are fat. I know this, that OSHA has told us we need to separate the chemicals, but I don't remember all the details of why we need to pull them out of the building.
Very important.
I'd be glad to get you answers to those questions, but I can't do it without Jason here.
and remember,
Did you ask earlier in the week?
I talked to him, and he was not available for Friday, today, because he'll be otherwise occupied.
Were you asking for him to be here?
I asked him if he could be here, because I knew it was going to be, his budget was going to be attacked, and
Oh.
he said he's not going to be able to be here.
I wish you would have told me. I would have made him be here.
Oh.
I didn't know that he took a day off. I would have had him here.
Oh.
Sonny?
Well, I told
I
him.
guess,
his budget.
I guess the point that I would have to make here is the fact that, remember, our purpose is to budget the money in this budget. No expenditures, whether it be outbuildings or anything else, will be able to be expended without our permission anyway. So just because we put the money in the budget doesn't mean that they're going to spend it. We still have to authorize the expenditure of those funds.
Is there a
So
motion?
when it comes time to have a discussion about, whether we spend $10,000 for outbuildings or whether we don't, that's your opportunity to vote no if you don't feel we need to have them.
And I would think you should go down there and look at those reasons why he has them, because they're very sound and important reasons to separate the chlorine from the other chemicals in that building.
And that very well may be a very fine expenditure of funds. Now, explain to me what benefit we get for $16,000 for travel and conventions out of one department.
Commissioner
Again,
Maxwell,
again, the point
You're not
is-
addressing the motion,
Let's-
and we do have a motion on the floor.
well, yeah, let me just say one thing. The budget, at its best, is no more than a guide. And if you budget something and don't spend it, goody. But if you budget something and you gotta budget something else and you gotta amend the budget, then you gotta amend the budget. So,
But
as soon as you get done passing this, it's gonna be open to be changed as soon as we pass it.
Let's pass the whole thing. Well, once we get this resolved.
I don't get
Okay.
a motion on the floor.
Your motion is to reduce the budget from the pool by 50,000 and increase interest by 25, right?
for your recommendation.
Thank you.
All right, Pat.
Credit's due.
No wonder she sits next to me.
All right, Pat. Loving it.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Hey, that's number 2 this year.
2 for 2.
Okay.
So
Next.
Okay, now we do department reviews.
What's that about?
You
Well,
started
that's
going
the way we
through
started
the
going
individual
through
budgets, and I think last time when you met, you went through 3. So I didn't know if you were going to continue to go through the individual budgets, but in the order that you told me to put this together, that would be the next thing for you to do.
Seems to,
I personally can't see any reason to go through every tab in this book, because a lot of them, there's not much you can do with. These people have developed a budget, and they're professionals at it, and like I said, it's only a guide, so if you've got some points that you want to bring out in some of them, okay. Sonny?
Mr. Chairman, in reference to, if we do this alphabetically, the next budget center in our book is Central Dispatch. And I would like to move that we continue the temporary call taker that we have in Central Dispatch. I believe the 211, or the 211, now you got me saying it, Herb. The 911 surcharge money that's been identified by Jamel shows that we're actually going to receive more money than we projected that we would. And we have to add about $30,000, I believe, Dennis, to this budget in order to have that full-time call taker. Is that correct? I believe there's absolutely a need there.
Did you want a temporary or for?
Well, we have a temporary there now. I want to make
change it
it,
to
I want to make it a permanent position, and there will be some additional costs
$23,095 in revenue.
Where are we getting the money?
from the additional 911 surcharge money, because we are getting more money than we are projecting that we are. If you look at the papers that Jamel provided you for this year, we're well above where we anticipated.
Just wanted to clarify for the public.
So we're taking and we're making a temporary call taker position into a permanent second
position.
permanent call taker position.
Right, and then the staffing plan will have to be amended and those types of
Is that a
things.
motion?
Yes, sir.
I'll support that motion.
Ross already did.
Moved and supported. Discussion. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed, the same, motion carries. All right, moving right along. Anybody got any problems with community credit?
No, I would move that we approve the budget as currently presented, with Mr. Bott keeping us informed with per-monthly updates, as he has been doing.
I'll support that.
Which budget is it?
Budget in the book.
No, which department?
Total
No,
budget.
I'm the whole budget.
Oh, the total budget.
As
I see.
presented.
I see.
Yes, sir.
I just want to clarify, if we're addressing that motion, I'd like to clarify 2 items. The first one is that the $160,000 differential with the furlough days, Dennis was going to give us, you presented us a recommendation on how you were going to evenly spread that out among all the departments, or most of the departments within the county. If we could take a look at that as a part of our recommendation here, to make sure everyone's cool with that. And,
Well, that's D on the,
Well, but those changes have to, in order to adopt this budget as
Yeah, we have to
presented,
look at that.
you have to address those changes.
yeah, and then I think we need to at least look at that. So we'll just pass that down.
You had identified that, though, right?
Pardon?
You guys had identified where it was going to come from within the department?
Thank you.
What we did is we put,
Just wait until they get done chatting. Go ahead.
All right, we have a motion on the floor, and I have to ask the question, how does this budget, as Commissioner Hooper just suggested and was supported by Commissioner Fleece, support our mission and vision? And I don't think it does, because basically we're taking a huge chunk out of the sheriff's department, and I can't support that.
You're talking about the 100 and the...
Yeah.
Distribution.
Yeah,
$160,000.
and I think we need to find it elsewhere. I mean, what's our mission? What's our vision? What are our goals? What is our strategic plan? And by adopting this, the way it sits, as you and Commissioner Hooper have just suggested, does not, in my opinion, support the strategic plan, the goals. You take a look at a safe community, no.
Well, I think the Chairman Thomas addressed that pretty clearly. You know, the budget is merely a guideline. The minute we're done, and if we thought we had an item of perfection, it's probably going to have to be altered anyway. As far as the staff's recommendation where the 160 would come from, I believe, Dennis, didn't you ask the departments to check their budget and see where?
I guess yes, that's exactly right.
And, okay, let me finish then, thank you. But anyway, that's why we have these people sitting here. If the board wants to sit down and go line by line, that's fine too. But the problem with that is we're not here all the time, and we don't know the day-to-day operations like the staff does. And I think you have to rely on the staff's expertise. If a problem comes up, I'm sure they're going to identify it, and perhaps we'll have to address it. And I noticed the sheriff is sitting in the audience today, and I'm sure if he thought there was a major altercation going on in his budget, he would have been sitting right at the thing during public comment addressing this board.
So with regard to the motion, I just want to make sure everyone's happy with this. You know, I'm just wondering procedurally if we should just withdraw that motion and then deal with this and then come back and deal with the motion that's at hand.
I think that would probably be the
Smoother.
the
That'd be
appropriate
smoother.
order to do it.
All right, I'll withdraw my motion.
All right, I'll withdraw. Did I do
And
this
I would
correct?
consider,
Mr.
Please.
Fleece seconded.
Yeah. And let's just deal with this document, and then we can come back and make a motion to adopt the budget.
Well, that additional $160,000 is in this budget, so if we are not going to have the furlough days and we're not going to cut that out of there, we need to address
we
this
do,
before
right.
we can adopt the budget.
Right.
I think we can do that first.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
So what we did here, so this, now we're going to concentrate on this. You directed us to go back to the departments and find $160,000 in cuts, which was equivalent to the furlough days that we recommended. And let me just show you what this is. The first pages where it's in black print are the results that each of the departments came up with. There were a few revenue enhancements, but most of them were cuts in the budget. I want to make it clear that I hope no one interprets this as this was just fat that we found and we got rid of it. Some of these cuts will mean people won't go to conferences, won't get the training they typically get, other things will happen that will limit their ability to do the work. But what we did here is, as I told you last time, Dean and I went and we looked at how much of the general fund what percentage of the general fund each of these departments were getting. And then what we did is we allocated the $160,000 based on that and gave them that percentage of it. That's why, for example, the sheriff ends up with almost $60,000 because they have almost $11 million of the $40 million general fund. So the first pages in black are where the departments voluntarily made the changes. The next page, which is in blue and goes to the following page, these are things where there's no department. It's Dean and I primarily. The insurance and bond line item, the county law line item, the surveyor, building authority, and this, we made proposals to take care of those cuts. And then the last one were the departments who did not make any voluntary cuts, and there was only the one, and we recommended transfer. When you see transfer out, that means reduce the appropriation to the department, and they'll figure out where that reduction will come. So we came up with $160,000, and And I do want to point out one thing that the Sheriff's Department has kind of been working on in between all their other responsibilities, and that is, we've been talking over the last 2 days about their consideration of readopting a fee for inmates that are in the jail that act as trustees, a daily fee. Our other inmates, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but our other inmates have a fee that they pay for being in the jail. They're charged for their time in the jail. And we do not charge trustees for their time in the jail. Is that correct, Nate?
That is correct. We do not. And that was part of a recommendation by us a couple of years ago when we approached this board and asked to increase fees for boarding. And the fee at that time was increased to $20 a day.
So in my discussions with Nate and the sheriff, they are in the process of identifying how much money a fee on these trustees would be. And I agree with them that putting a fee on that, I mean, why should they not have to pay for their time in the jail when they're getting the same support as the other people in the jail? And I'd like to give the sheriff and the undersheriff a chance to look at that some more. And what I'm going to suggest to you is, and Dean agrees, if they can come up with a really tangible number before the end of October and show that they can implement that fee, and you agree, and it raises some portion of the revenue, they've asked you to consider cutting the cuts that are proposed in this $56,000 and letting that revenue be, take the place of the cut. So it would still balance this 160 out. I don't know if I said that. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? We could restore some of the cuts that they made if you give them the option to spend the next, week or so looking at that revenue source and then bringing it back to you to see if you're willing to adopt it.
Would they bring that back to public safety and work it through the committees then?
Well, I think what they'd probably do is bring it back at Ways and Means and would present it to you as a technical amendment to the budget. We're still going to probably try to get the budget to the board at Ways and Means, correct?
Oh, we need to if we're going to follow the calendar, but I wanted to add one thing to Dennis's comments. The actual reductions that we made for the sheriff's office in total, the sheet tallies $56,667. The undersheriff identified with Dennis and myself this morning additional revenue, so the actual cuts are at $48,000 approximately. We did identify another revenue source, so
right.
The $48,000 figure is the amount that we've asked them to cover at this point.
Dean and I have gone through these line item by line item, and we're comfortable with the recommendations that the department made. The only thing we would ask is that if you agree, that you give some consideration to allow them to look at this other revenue source as a way to offset some of these expenditure cuts that they had to submit to you.
I think that's a good idea.
Dennis, the only question I had is, as I read through these, basically every department is cutting their MIS fees.
Well,
what does that do to our MIS department?
No, the MIS department, when you went through and when we went through and made cuts to their budget, they went back over the last 2 weeks and they identified that their rates to the departments will go down as a result, their support rates, because they charge rates for phones and for IT. So they were able to incorporate those reductions because they're going to be real reductions. It will not affect the IT budget that you're...
Okay, well, I was just concerned because every budget center is taking out MIS costs. I was kind of surprised the health department implemented appears to be a program of voluntary furloughs.
Yep. Yeah, we talked about that. They have several employees that primarily work in the school months, hearing and vision programs, who have and then they supplement other programs. But they've kind of expressed an interest or a willingness to take some time off, and so I have no problem with that. Fred's supportive of it, and the union is supportive of it.
Great.
Okay, well, I'd really like to thank the departments for the participation because I'm sure this isn't easy to deal with.
I would make a motion to approve the allocation of the $160,000 budget reduction as presented.
Support.
Richardson, support. Discussion?
I have a question.
The only thing that I would ask is that it also give the sheriff the opportunity to amend his budget and come back and...
Correct. I would include that in the motion.
I have a question for you. When you talked before about furlough days, and we were talking about, 2 furlough days, one of the questions that I had was, as you implement Siegel and you begin to pay employees more competitively, taking a look at areas where Siegel has identified the benefits to be more generous than what's comparable. And that would have been in the paid personal days, the 8 days in which you pay if someone doesn't take them. You don't have a use it or lose it policy. You pay up to those 8 days if they don't take them. And that was identified as I said, something more generous. And I believe in compensating the employees competitively, but as you do that, I think you need to look at areas as well where it may be more generous. And so I'm wondering if you have given that any thought and potentially even any recommendations regarding that, or?
Well, understand that there were 3 areas that I think we identified where our employees are somewhat better compensated than other in our market. The first one was retirement, which you made a decision you were going to leave alone, because that's in our MERS system, and we have contracts with MERS. We're not allowed to reduce that down. The second one was in health insurance, and you said we're going to, if we prorate the implementation of Siegel, we're going to prorate copay on health insurance up to 10%. And basically, we're looking at 3% the first year, an additional 3% the second, and then an additional 4%, so there'll be a 10% copay on health insurance. The third area that we recently talked about was not the number of personal days, but the fact that our employees get to buy those days if they don't use those days. As I told you last time, that was part of a transition that you made as a county board when you took away sick days. So you had 12 sick days and 2 personal days, and instead what you did is you negotiated with the employees, and they're in many of the contracts, and said, we will give you 8 personal days, and you are allowed to use them when you're sick. We're taking away your 12 sick days, and the trade-off was, if you don't use the sick days, we'll pay you. And the reason for that is under the old system, and this is very common in Michigan, I don't know, it may be other places too, what typically was in place when they had sick days is if they didn't use them, they got to accumulate them. And typically what happened is at retirement, they got 50% of them paid out at, 50% of them paid out. Many people would accumulate 100, 120 days. And the problem with that is that then what happens is you accumulate them over a 10 or 15-year period. You start accumulating them at $10 an hour, and when you leave, you're being paid $18 an hour, and then you pay it out at $18 an hour. So it's very expensive. So the county, this was before my time, but the county made a decision that this system is a better system because you're paying it out, if you pay it out, if they don't use them, you're paying it out at the current rate of pay. And you limited it from a total of 14 when you include the personal days and the sick days down to 8. And so that was a decision that the board made several years ago and negotiated into the collective bargaining agreement. So you cannot change that without bargaining it.
So the 12 and the 2 days that there were before 14, were they paid out?
No. Only when, as I said earlier, only when you left employment and at 50%.
I'll give you an example, Beth. When I left the city, I had in excess of 240 sick days. And upon retirement, I was able to negotiate a deal where I traded some of those for some benefits, and then they paid me for the 50% remaining. So what Dennis is saying has been an agreement.
Excuse me, but I can't hear Commissioner Fleece, and I'm sorry, I'm deaf in my right ear, but there's conversation going off here.
Yeah, apologies.
But that's a was a long-standing practice, and I think the city has modified their agreement too.
Dean also reminded me, and I wasn't aware of this, but Dean was here at the time. The other thing was, and you see it all the time in retirement, in health, government is now all being required to fund the unfunded liability. And I think that was another reason the county board went to this, because we're paying it off in the year rather than having to find a way to fund these hundreds of thousands of dollars, for future liability when these people leave.
So that gives me a lot of history on how you got to here. But as one of the things she said is, if you choose to repay that. And I guess what I'm saying is, as you implement Siegel to pay more competitively, I think that this policy should be looked at too and possibly negotiated as well.
Well, it can, and we can talk about that at an appropriate time in a closed session, but I would tell you this. What I've seen in the initial analysis is we are somewhat behind in the vacation days based on the market. And so when you add the cumulative days that they have off, they are between 1 and 2 days under what everyone else is paid. So it is something that could be negotiated, but I would tell you that in the negotiations I'm doing so far, that for the majority of the employees, the health payment that they are being required to do if we negotiate Siegel into the contract is for many employees, and I would say probably half, means a net loss in pay under the present system, and then you'd be considering taking away another 8 days' pay. And so you aren't going to negotiate many contracts.
I didn't say you had to do all 8. I mean, there's the option as well to limit it to 4 or something like that, but the
We
point
can
is still the
certainly
same.
talk about it. Absolutely, we can talk about
See,
it.
again, we digress. There's a motion on the floor, I think.
I don't think it was digressing. I think it had to do with the 160,000 in furlough days.
Well, these aren't furlough days we're addressing.
That's the reason you had to make up the $160,000.
We do.
Okay.
Almost forgot.
Well, we got a motion.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Opposed?
Opposed, the same. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Friend,
No.
Hooper,
Yes.
Inman,
Yes.
Axbauer,
No.
Richardson,
Yes.
Wheelock,
Yes.
Fleece,
Yes.
Chairman Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, before we get into a motion on the budget, I got 2 other quick questions if I could. To Dennis, we have, I'm just referring to the chairman's recommendation, I just want to make sure we're clear on a couple of these items. The $50,000 to Metro Fire for the educational program is now amended into this budget?
No, absolutely not. You haven't talked about that.
So we still need to address that.
Right now, the budget has $88,000 in it
Oh, it does?
for the fire department.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
All right.
It does not have $37,000 in it for MSU.
Ah,
This budget has $88,000 in it for the fire department. So if you adopt the budget, there will be $88,000 for the fire department, unless you do something else to amend that budget, today, or whenever during your budget hearings.
all right. And the second question I have for you is, and I apologize for this because it's probably part of the phone conference that I couldn't hear. Is the fireworks 211 Civic Center South, is that in this budget?
They are not in this budget.
They are not in the budget.
were eliminated in the budget. And in my discussions with commissioners, I recommended that you look at the Civic Center South and the 211 as an appropriation out of year-end funds this year, the way we did last year, as opposed to putting them into this budget. But if you want to identify, if commissioners want to identify other cuts in this budget, you certainly can put them into the budget.
So would we, for example, on 211, we had suggested that they present
$20,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we initially put 20 into the plan.
Yes.
And they were going to come back with whatever their plan was, so we can have a comfort level. It was going to go for a big purpose and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So are you saying that in this budget, the '09 budget, we would transfer 20 that we've allocated for that mark and hold it?
You know how a couple weeks ago you decided to take $60-some thousand out of this year's budget to fund MSU through the end of the year if they don't get their state money? I'm suggesting the same kind of thing be given consideration for 211 and for the Civic Center South. And the fireworks, which is about $6,500 in total, I suggest you look at that next March or April before the fireworks start, to see where that's going to go, because frankly, from some of the things I've heard, there are a lot of issues there that they're going to have to put that together.
All right. So we can, in essence, keep the same dollar amount for 50,000 or 88,000 for the fire department, and we can look at any supplemental fund balance from the end of this year, this fiscal year, to fund the MSU extension situation. Could that be the way to handle that?
I don't know that we would agree that's how that should be handled, because these are one-time expenditures that you're earmarking and putting into a separate fund for these specific purposes. You can't really, I think Dean would agree, we do not take fund from this year and reallocate them to next year's ongoing operational expenditures. I think you can I think you can, but you can go to leftover funds, fund balance, things like that. You can look at it at the end of this year. Would that be how you would suggest we do it?
Yes.
All right.
But-
Okay, I'm fair. I'm good.
But you do take money that's left over at the end of this year and dedicate it to ongoing expenses next year.
No, well,
That's called your fund balance.
no, well, yeah, but you're simplifying it. What happens is, we close the year, we see if there's a fund balance, it goes into the fund balance, and it's allocated
From that.
8 months later for the following year.
Well, call me simple, but, I mean, you're still taking a one-time amount and putting that towards ongoing expenditures, and it's not a sustainable thing to do. I mean, we've talked about this before. After next year, if you utilize your operating expenses next year, you will have to cut $1 million out of your next year's budget if you follow this year's budget.
I'm just looking
And-
for...
And, you know, and I apologize for putting a letter on commissioners' desks right now, but I have asked that we immediately address next year as soon as this budget is adopted, because Commissioner Friend is exactly right. We've got approximately $400,000 out of fund balance budgeted for this year. We've got $1 million budgeted out of fund balance for next year. We can't keep doing this, and it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed immediately.
But you don't even know if we're going to go $400,000 of
I
fund
don't
balance
know,
this
but
year.
it's in the budget,
And
and
the farther
you
out, the
can't...
farther out you get, the harder it is to predict.
I-
The bigger of a guess it becomes.
I
because-
understand
because
that
there's
it's
two sides
difficult
the
to
coin.
predict.
There's expenditures, but there's also revenue. And you don't know what the revenue's going to be either.
But
And that's
what
why
you're
we're
doing
increasing
is
things
you're-
like the capital fund and other subjects like that.
You're taking your fund balance and you're supplanting your revenue to equal your operating expenses. You need to have an operating budget where your operating expenses equal your operating revenues, and then what you are able to do
I would agree with you
is
if
take
there were...
any excess.
I would agree with you if there were no fund balance, but that's sort of what the fund balance is there. It's like a
But
big
what I'm
bumper
suggesting
for
to
the
use is
county.
if we've seen that capital improvement be able to drop down like that, that we use that money as a tool to fund those priorities.
Yeah, but 6 months from now, you'll have a much better idea of where we're at than you do right now. We all will.
What I would like to say is, I don't see this changing in this budget discussion by any means, and I wouldn't even suggest that. But what I would say is that, that we have a fund balance policy. I forwarded one to Dennis. It outlines exactly when you utilize fund balance, for what purposes, and what you do if there's excess, what priorities you're going to put it towards, such as capital improvements, one-time expenditures, those sorts of things. If you end up using into your fund balance, how you will repay that over a dedicated period of time to come back to that. So, you know, I would suggest that we implement a policy such as that.
You could honestly say that the $1 million that if we do appropriate it, the $1 million you're appropriating for your capital improvement fund is the fund balance you're spending. So you're basically just taking $950 out of fund balance and putting it over here in another pot.
It is a different way of showing it, but what I'm also telling you, we've heard, budget is a planning tool. Yes, it is. It's also a communication tool. It also shows what your priorities are, and this is how you show that. Now, I don't think that you'll take $950,000 out of this budget, and I'm not suggesting that you do. But what I am saying is maybe over a period of the next 3 to 4 years, that you start to stagger down that amount that you're budgeting in for your fund balance, according to your policy, and you begin to fund those other longer-term priorities, to which, you know, you start saying yes to all of them, you're going to wipe through that money, and you don't even have money for your bigger projects. But then what are we going to do? We're going to go out and ask for a millage for that.
Well, you're assuming that this is like a slope that we're sliding down and that's never going to change. I mean, we are reacting to, I think, you know, a situation where revenue is either decreasing or flattening, and I think we're responding fairly well, and we should be happy that there is a $9.5 million fund balance
I
to
am
absorb
very
this.
happy. I'm extremely thrilled.
I guess
that
what I
was-
don't understand is I don't understand what your point is.
I'm very happy that they have built the fund balance up to this point. I'm not being critical of that. That was appropriate. What I'm saying is right now, at the end of the next budgeted year, or what will be the next budget year, you're finally at that 20%.
So then
We don't even know that. Well, then we get out the sharp knives and really go after it.
Well, and this
Don't
is
you
my
think
point.
we need to
This
plan
is-
now?
No, hold
this
on.
minute,
This
no.
is my point. When do you get out those sharp knives and do it? Do you do it 6 months into a year and you need the cuts in a month to 3 months? I don't think that's the appropriate way to do it. The appropriate way to do it would be to take from now till the end of the year.
Then get out your knife and
determine-
make some motions.
Hold on a second. From now till the end of the year, determine exactly how we're going to see which programs we think operate efficiently, which ones we're going to cut and which ones we don't, and then do that over the next year.
Dennis?
I totally agree with that comment, that we can spend as much time as you want over the next year going through the budgets and determining where you want to cut. But I read in the paper all the time, the county's using fund balance for this and the county's using fund balance for that, and that's popular. But here's the facts, and I've given this all to you. Since 2001, we've budgeted over $17 million of fund balance into the budget. And in that time, we have spent $125,000 of it. 17 million, and we've spent 125,000. And our fund balance has gone from 5 million to 9.5 million. And when you say we're going to finally be at the 20%, we only got to 20% about 2 years ago. Before that, we were 10%, 12%, 15%. So we're just new in this territory. And so my only point here is, as I've told you many times, we budget it, we don't spend it. If we start spending it, we absolutely have to do it. And I want to also say, this is not, it makes it sound like there's no time to plan. In 2004, we cut $2 million out of the budget because we saw what was coming. Also, I want to point out that in the fund balance policy that you sent me, the second line reads, this is the one you suggested,
Yep.
The accumulation of reserves in more favorable economics times is a resource to sustain a municipality in times of economic and political stress, which is exactly where we are.
Absolutely, but you've been budgeting fund balance for the past 10 years.
And using only 125,000 of it out of 17 million that we budgeted.
And what I'm saying is, I think you need to more accurately represent the budget. I think you need to have an
I
operating
agree.
balanced budget.
I agree
I mean,
with
it's
Commissioner
not very
Friend.
simple to do. You have to whittle away and you have to get more accurate. I understand that, but it's a policy choice and it's how to show it and how to communicate your priorities. And
Sonny?
Well, you know, one of the things is, I've been around here long enough, I lived through that 2004 budget when we cut $2 million out and eliminated 22 positions in order to get to our fund balance that we have. But I also have been through this process long enough to remember a thing called the Budget Stabilization Fund, that when Dennis got here, he says, what the hell is this? And it was just a number that was put in the budget that we rarely tapped into, and it was just in there as a budget stabilization to equate to our total fund balance and our general fund expenditures. It was all it was, but it was in there for that. But then we looked at budgets that had every dime that we had in the bank and every dime that we were going to expend all showed up in every budget. It didn't show a fund balance.
Well, listen, but as I said, I would welcome and be more than happy with Dean to sit down and go through this budget by budget, and I would love to have the board establish priorities, because that will make it so much easier if we see in the middle of next year that we're starting to use fund balance to tell us where you want us to cut, because, you know, that certainly is our job, to prepare a budget based on your desires and needs. So if the board wants to do that, we're more than happy to. We'll make those cuts and we'll present you a balanced budget. And if you don't want to use fund balance, we will certainly provide you a budget that has fund balance out, but it would be very helpful, as Commissioner Friend said, that you give us some guidance about where your priorities lie, because it's pretty hard for us to read your minds. You know, we need some idea of that.
Pretty hard for us to do that today, too.
I think I'm sorry.
Sonny?
I guess the only other thing that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this budget is the car allowances. We only have 3 or 4 in the entire budget.
I think I put it in there. I think we have 4 or 5, yeah.
And I would like to see all of the car allowances eliminated from this budget.
My suggestion...
And we'll eliminate them, we'll pay them mileage for the miles, in fact, that they do drive.
My suggestion would be the best time, or you can do it today if you prefer, the appropriate time is when you consider the elected officials' salaries at the meeting at the end of the month. You have to set the elected officials' salaries then, and I think we provided that to you, and I think that 3 of them have car allowance, and I think the only other one is myself.
Oh, I see.
And, you know, so you can do it now, if you prefer, if you want to say, direct us to take it out of there, and then we would cut it from the budget, and then we could reduce the fund balance by that amount. That would be one option.
My point is the fact that I'm assuming that you're going to take all of this back with the changes we've made over the last 2.5-week period.
Right.
And bring us a final draft. I'd like to not see car allowances in that final draft.
My only
That's
motion-
why I'd like to make that decision today.
The only comment I would make about that is, and this is the same discussion we've had about car allowances in the past, but, I don't know, some time ago, Commissioner Maxbauer brought you her analysis of the market counties and who gets car allowances and who doesn't. And in almost every case, there were no car allowances in the market, okay? The difference is that they were paying those elected officials at the market rate. So what I'm saying is, in my mind, this is just my recommendation to you, if you're going to take away the car allowances, they need to be paid at the Siegel rate. And if you just take away the car allowance and you don't pay them at the Siegel rate, then you're really penalizing them. And over the last 2 years when we've discussed this, we've said the car allowances kind of supplement their salary because we've identified that their salaries are low. So that would be my only suggestion to you.
Well, I guess my understanding of a car allowance is it's compensation for miles they drive. The IRS has established a rate which is supposed to be compensation for the miles that you drive. I'm not saying that these people aren't eligible to receive mileage for the miles they drive. I just would like to see the documentation to that.
Well, and then the other one I would ask you to consider a little bit in evaluating this is the county treasurer, because, you know, gave him that extra responsibility of picking up all the cash and traveling around, and you could do it through miles, and I think if you do that, he would understand, but I think his situation is a little bit different than the rest of us. But if you want to do it now, you can do it now, and then we address it. The only thing I'm asking is, I'm hoping that that will be coupled with the Siegel implementation at a third, because I think that's, you know, if you're going to compare who has mileage in that, who gets a car allowance in that market, and you're going to compare, I would ask you to compare the salaries in that market as well, and not just one piece of it.
If a car allowance is part of their salary, or considered part of their salary legally, we can't lower it now. The only time you can lower it.
We can lower car allowance.
You know what?
If it's part of the salary, you can't lower it.
Commissioner, I didn't even think of that, but I think you're right. I don't think you can.
I don't think it's part of the salary.
Well, health insurance is, remember?
No, I think we had a disagreement on that wasn't resolved.
Well, but you were actually the one who said that it was Al Schneider who indicated that it was part of the salary.
No, I said it was not compensation.
Well, I met with him right after that, and he indicated that is part of compensation.
Well, I
and
have
that
an
it cannot
opinion
be
that he wrote
reduced
about the
during-
road commission, that he said health insurance was not.
They're not elected.
They're not
It's elected
elected. They're
officials.
appointed.
You
Elected
cannot
officials.
reduce the elected officials' compensation during the term of office. That's true whether it's a township, a city, a county.
Right.
And what Al has said is, his interpretation is, the benefits
Are in there.
are part of the compensation, and you cannot reduce it down during the term. And I will double-check that, but Commissioner
think you
Thomas,
can.
I think you're correct. I don't know that you can. You can with me, but I don't know that you can with elected officials.
Can we address that question at Ways and Means? You can just clarify it.
I will do
Well,
that.
and that's before the budget adoption.
I will do that.
I'm fine with the budget as, I mean, with all the direction we've given Dennis to go ahead and give
Okay,
him direction to give us our
Bruce
final
has been waiting
product.
quite a while.
Yeah, I would move that we approve the budget as presented with Mr. Bott keeping us informed per monthly updates and periodic budget adjustment announcements as needed.
Support. Moved and supported.
I wanted to address Veteran Affairs. I think Veterans Affairs is one agency that has truly justified that they are understaffed, that their demands for services has been going up, you know, at a rapid rate. And what I would really like to see is they have a case manager who's working 3 days out of 5, and I would just like to see that case manager increased to a full-time position, which will cost, according to Dennis's estimates, $21,700 a year.
Plus, in addition, Ross, if we're going to address their budget, the burial fund is
Underfunded.
underfunded.
Well, I
We
understand
should
that,
raise
but-
that to 50,000.
But I'm just looking, this really is a very small token for what they're faced with, but.
No, and I agree, I
And
agree with
I mean, if we could start on that, there may be no end to it, but I'm just saying, we ought to look at this one whole, this one small thing as, as an increase in spending. These people are, the Veterans Department is helping people in this county get money from the federal government. And if
the
we can-
veterans.
If we can speed that up, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and I think, absolutely, and I think the community has an obligation to do that. And the Veterans Affairs Office in this county, by the work they do, literally bring millions and millions of dollars from the feds in here.
I think it was 15 million last year.
Yeah. And with this new clinic coming in, that's going to employ,
10 to 12?
up to 15 is.
And I could see it creating more demands on the services that we're
I
providing.
think that's likely. I think you're right.
Because there's just more visibility and so forth.
So do you want to address that in?
Can that be added as an amendment to the motion?
It can be amended, yeah.
Yes.
You willing to?
Okay, I'm willing to amend
You
that.
have to, I think you need to identify where the money's coming.
Okay, I've got to ask.
Wait till we get a second on the amendment.
We got,
I'll support that.
Are we still funding $88,000 for fire education?
yes.
It is in this budget, yes.
Okay,
No,
so we got to find how much?
the budget is.
$21,718.
Motion.
With
The
periodic
amendment is that
updates.
we add 21,700, is that what it was?
$21,717.57.
Veterans Affairs.
To come from where?
I didn't suggest that yet.
How much
Going to
left?
have to come out of fund
I
balance.
think
There's
what we ought to
nowhere
do
else
is
to
ask
have to
Dean where it
take
would come from and take his recommendation.
Where's it coming from, Bot?
How about our health
Contingency.
insurance benefits?
I can go along
Well,
with that.
as
Good.
Commissioner Fleece indicated, if I'm going to give you the short answer, it's your 70, out of the 75,000 you have in the board's contingency.
Right.
I would not
Line item.
recommend that. 75,000 is
Nothing.
nothing. And so
But
I'd
without-
find it someplace
Yeah,
else.
without-
Do it, take car allowances, do whatever,
Yeah.
but
What
I'd
about
find it
carry-
someplace else.
What
Well,
kind
we
of
need to find
carryover?
today.
What kind of carryover are we going to have
Sure,
for
we
this
have to
year?
find it today, because we have to.
We don't know yet.
Don't know.
We have no idea.
Oh, I see.
Depends how much you spend.
On the levy.
Well, since the chairman had recommended a carryover for 38,000 for the fire department, if we're not going to do that and keep it at 88, and we haven't talked about 37,000 for the MSU extension deal, because that's not in the budget, let's take it out of that.
Well,
That's not in the
37 is
budget.
extra.
It's not in the budget.
You're saying taken out of the
Let's
88?
take.
That was gonna come
37's
by-
not in the budget?
No.
Oh,
All right.
No.
I would, since I'm the one who made the motion to spend more money here, I'm willing to address that by making some recommendations for the $21,000,
Let's see, Dean. what-
going forward.
Yeah.
Or ask Dean to make some recommendations.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Richardson, I'm confused. The motion was made by Commissioner Hooper and Fleece, the original motion, which was not voted on, then Mr. Hooper was asked to amend his motion.
That's right, that's true, I'm sorry. So I did not make the motion.
Okay, thank you.
So what is the motion and who made it?
The motion was made by Commissioner Hooper, which was supported by Commissioner Fleece, to approve the budget as presented, with Mr. Bott keeping us informed at monthly updates, and then it was amended, the motion was amended to increase the Veterans Counselor to a full-time position at a cost of $21,717.57.
With that to be identified by Mr. Bott, where it's coming from.
That's what you did last year, so.
No, I'm serious.
We'll just put it,
Yeah.
we'll figure it out. We'll
That's-
figure it out.
Yeah, Dean.
put a kettle over here.
Okay, I'm fine with that then. To be determined, I guess, huh?
So we'll
Right.
present where that money came from when we give you the technical amendments
The monthly
in the third week of this month.
I think interest is going to be really higher.
We're not touching it. We're not-
Bill's sitting right back there. Don't talk like that. What's that?
any further discussion? Any consequence? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Hooper,
Yes.
Inman,
Yes.
Max Bauer,
No.
Richardson,
Yes,
Wheelock?
Yes.
Fleece?
Yes.
Friend?
Nope.
Chairman Thomas?
Yep.
Okay.
Motion passes.
Now we got elected official salaries, huh?
Well, you don't have to adopt those. Last time, we brought it to you at the board meeting, which is, your annual meeting, and that's when we brought those. If you want to discuss those now, you certainly can, and we'll make it part of the recommendation.
Are those dollar amounts in the budget?
Yes.
Yes. All right. And those dollar and the recommendation was based on Siegel?
Yes, 1/3.
1/3.
Okay.
I think we should address it like we always have.
So we're going to address it at the October board meeting? Normally, if I can speak,
Sure. How can I stop you?
it's been the protocol of the board since I've been on here that we put that as a line item on the Ways and Means Committee. We make a recommendation at that point in time, and it gives the public notice that we're going to vote on it at our board meeting. So I would suggest we put that line item at the Ways and Means meeting.
And that's when you'll get the budget as well, is at the Ways and Means meeting.
Right.
Does that sound like a motion to me?
Yeah, I would move that we review and discuss and make decisions on elected official salaries other than commissioners at the Ways and Means meeting for October.
You said other than commissioners?
Yeah, I don't have a recommendation for commissioners. Oh, we can't make a recommendation because ours is frozen for 2 years, the 09 and 010.
Yeah, I was
So,
gonna say, you
yeah, we
couldn't
don't-
make a
we're not going
recommendation.
to deal with commissioner salaries.
Was that seconded?
I did.
Supported. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the same, carried. Vote, I didn't give you no time to vote.
I voted.
Okay,
I was there.
all right,
I had a couple questions, if that's all right.
certainly.
Regarding fund balances. Dean, this is the information you emailed me today.
Yeah, what they do with them?
The revenue sharing reserve of was 9.99 million at the end of last year.
Correct, and we're looking, actually, Commissioner Richardson, I updated the analysis to you with a column for what we budgeted to use in 2009,
Okay.
2010, and I have misplaced them, butLl find them.
All right, what year are we projected to be through? I mean, we're using this money down every year, correct?
2004, the funds that are in the revenue sharing reserve fund are scheduled to last through 2014.
Okay.
And I have an analysis of that, which I will bring to Ways and Means later this month.
Okay, so obviously a portion of that has been budgeted into the 2010.
Correct. The state tells us how much we're allowed to use. It's called the allowable spending amount, and we have to wait until the state, but for the 2010 budget, I estimated an increase of, I think, 2 to 2.5%.
Which is fairly interesting, because the state gives us how much we can spend out of that fund as our revenue sharing. But the recent action of the legislature to reimburse for the revenue sharing is like $200,000 to $300,000 less than they tell us we can spend.
I do want to comment, though, that there are some efforts in Lansing right now to, I don't know, I should be careful with the words I use here. They're looking at that. I don't know what that means, but they're looking at that.
That means they're gonna cut it.
Means they're not done cutting it yet, probably.
This is Commissioner Richardson had asked for an analysis of our fund balances. This is a one-page summary, a lot of information, a lot of numbers, but...
We don't have enough?
We have
We're fine.
more. I'm indicating here the fund, and then the fund name. The first one, obviously, is the fund that we're most familiar with, the general fund, and that's the bulk of the budget that we dealt with this afternoon. The first column is identified as the fund balance as of 12/31/2008. These are audited numbers, so those numbers are pretty well set at this point. The next column, I wanted to show the amount of that fund balance that we have built into the 2009 budget. And then the third column shows the amount that we have budgeted in the 2010 budget at this time with the balance. There are some numbers here actually where we have budgeted more than we have, which I have to correct that. We can't budget for a deficit, and we'll make those corrections. But I really wanted to provide, I didn't have, a chance for Commissioner Richardson to show the uses or projected uses in 2009 and 10, but I thought that was very important that we have that to make this more complete. And granted, there are some funds on here that there are actually components of the fund balance that are designated. When you get into the special revenue funds, for example, 202, the special projects, those funds are dedicated at this point in time for the Twin Lakes Park improvements. Some other funds are also 262, the federal equitable sharing. Again, this is a balance as of the end of 2008, but, those funds are used for, law enforcement purposes. We've, obviously, we'll have more discussions about that. And then when you look at, like, the medical care, for example, large numbers, but the accounting focus for those funds is different than our general fund. That's actually a net asset number. You're looking at your assets less the liabilities coming back to a net. That's more of a full accrual. It includes infrastructure, buildings, depreciation, so that not necessarily an amount that's available for budget purposes, as this is the case with the general fund, which is more of a budgetary fund. So there's you can't look at the fund balance and all of these funds in the same way you would look at your general fund balance.
Anything else?
I do have a question. I'd like to know when over the next couple months or when over the next year, how we're going to start planning for either the $950,000, which may be whittled away, or on the converse case, if we end up adding to fund balance as we have in the past, how we'll be planning to use that for what purposes in the future.
And I sent a letter on everyone's desk, which basically says the same thing. I think we need to start planning, and I think we need to start now.
I'd agree with you.
I agree. In terms of the policy on fund balance, I think there were some really good aspects of that policy that you sent me, and my intention was to get with Dean and look at developing a policy for the board's consideration that would kind of address those issues of how we would utilize fund balance. So I intended to kind of bring a revised one. The old one was, just really doesn't say much.
Outdated.
Yep. So that was my intention with that fund balance policy, was to reevaluate it and bring it back to Ways and Means for your consideration in the next couple of months.
On that note, if I could speak, historically, Dennis, you have really kind of advanced us to previously, before you got here, the board used to adopt its budget at the end of the year, and apparently either we're not, at that point in time, we weren't doing the right thing, or we were waiting too long really to adopt the budget because we were trying to figure out last-minute grants and stuff like that. But so you got us to October, and I think the schedule you have with your departments started, I believe, in June.
Well, actually, it starts in March with...
Does it start in March?
April, I guess.
Does it start in April?
Yeah.
Is like a preliminary kind of a thing that you start looking at?
They start working on capital budget and new personnel in April.
In April.
For the year, next year.
So, given that schedule, it seems to me that we got two things we can do. We can either let that process continue at that same time schedule with some level of direction that says, we're probably going to be short $1 million or whatever. We're going to have to adjust. We're going to have to figure out how that's all going to be spread out, or what we're going to do. Or the board, but in keeping with that, I think maybe the board in the first quarter has to discuss where the priorities are, so we can probably give you and your department's direction as to when you begin your budget process. When does it, I'm just asking for your suggestion, when do you need the priority if we need to cut, let's assume we have a flat budget next year and we're not going to go into the fund balance for 950,000 or $1 million.
Right.
At what point in time do you need direction from us philosophically in terms of areas to help you and your department heads build on the schedule that you've put out for the year?
I would say no later than June 1st. May 1st would be better. And it would be great, as the two commissioners said, if we started it next
Now.
month. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, really, I think that's.
But the problem is, and I'm not saying that I have the solution, is how do you want to plan? What method do you want to choose to accomplish that? Because there's a million of them, and there's a million and at least 500,000 are ineffective. So I think that we need to take a look at, and that's why I think by the end of the year, we should identify how the heck we're going to do this. What type of analysis we're going to do. Is it cost allocating programs? Is it, I don't think, and I don't mean to be trite, I don't think it's voting on drinking bottled water versus,
I agree. It's
providing, a new jail. That's not cutting it. So how are you going to go in and identify your programs which are effective, cost efficient, deliver quality services from those that aren't? I mean, and maybe they're delivering some value, but it's not worth the cost to you. Do you see what
Budgeting
I'm
for
saying?
outcomes.
And that's one.
It will work.
And that's one, and I don't, and as I said, I'm not saying that I have the answer. What I'm saying is there's a host of different things out there, and we need to evaluate which one fits for Grand Traverse County.
And I think in conjunction with that, I think we have to recognize to some degree that, and maybe we just need, a session where we can just begin to build that building block, okay? About how we're going to how we're going to evaluate that process. But initially, I think we've always had kind of the guidance that there are certain levels of county government that are mandated by statute that we are required to fund. And I don't have all of them by memory, but, courts and jails and prosecutor's office, treasurer's office, secretary, or the clerk's office, registered deeds office, those kinds of things. And I think we lay those out. And as a part of the process, we lay all those mandated things out and we have to make sure we're funding those at an adequate level.
But even then, there's different methods of delivering those services.
I understand that,
and some may be more effective
But I think
than
it's
others.
important to identify the mandated services, and are we funding them at an adequate level, or is there any efficiencies that we can look at? Then I think we take a look at what's not mandated and what is discretionary in our budget, and take a look at the level of importances. I mean, maybe we get to a point where we start ranking the level of importance based on the vision, the mission, the feedback we got from the public, how the commissioners feel. And to what levels do we want to fund those, and try to match that up in the budget? I mean, that is certainly one process, but I think we have to understand that there are some things in county government we may not want to fund, but we have to fund.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to go through that process. So I think I'm following exactly what you're saying, is maybe that's the beginning process, and then we go from there, but.
Sonny?
Well, I guess, I certainly understand the process, and I know that we talked about it in 2003. We can't recycle enough paper clips to cut $2 million out of this budget, or $900,000. The only way we cut that kind of money is by elimination of programs and personnel, and that is going to affect our community. So we absolutely have to look at that very, very carefully. But, I think that we have to give an awful lot of credit to our county administrator. He is a professional. We have a professional finance team, and they bring us a professionally prepared budget. I'm not sure it's our place to sit here and go line by line through that budget and tell them, well, you budgeted too much for travel expense here. That's what these people do every day, and
Then whose job is it?
we hire good people, let the good people do their job. I absolutely am a firm believer
We
in
are
it.
responsible for the budget.
I am still responsible to hire good people and let them do their job. Micromanaging has done nothing but cause us headaches.
Larry?
Okay.
You know, Beth, in response to your questions and perhaps Christine's, my take on this is,
Which one specifically?
How we
Which one
determine the budget.
specifically?
no, how, your conversation with the budget and the planning and so forth. I would say that, and I believe in history, how we've been doing it can't be all that bad if today we have a $9.5 million fund balance. And I think what Sonny just said exemplifies the job that our staff does. We didn't accidentally end up with the $9.5 million budget. And I would presume when you're in your other role as a mother and a housewife, when you go shopping, perhaps you have an anticipation, because you have a budget of sorts, that you're going to spend $50 on groceries, what have you. Necessities for the house. But all of a sudden, while you're there, something changes. And I would have to believe, knowing you since January, that Beth...
And it's been fun, hasn't it?
It has. But that Beth went to that shopping chore with more than $50 in her wallet with the anticipation, and I'll call it a fund balance, just in case you had to dip into that fund balance because of a special that's going to save you money down the road. So I think we ought to look a little bit in the back. I think we need to commend the older commissioners, Thomas Wheelock and Larry.
They're older,
for the
I'm
fu-
not.
Huh?
They're older, but I'm not.
Well, I'm talking in terms on the board, for the fine job they've done in the past, because when I go over to Grayling for the Northern Michigan Association of Counties meeting, and I sit and I listen to all the other counties that are there, and some of them really have some financial problems, I say, thank God these people were on the ball, and were able to look into the future. Like Sonny said earlier today, 2004, they cut $2 million, and they cut 22 jobs. That's hard to do, but they did it, and thank goodness they did it. So I think, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I'm saying I think we have to take a little bit of the past along with us.
And I would say I've given accommodation for the fact that that fund balance has been built up over the years, absolutely. The fact that the way that they have dealt with the absence of revenue sharing and to use that for capital, absolutely, I agree with that. But I most value my role as a mom and a wife, but my other role is an economist and a researcher, and these are things and ideas that I haven't just whipped up in my own little mind, but I've researched and talked with people all over who are in charge of other budgets and other municipalities, who are CPAs, who are auditing, all of those things. So I do believe there's a real basis for the comments, and that we do indeed need to start planning whether we end up with a deficit or a surplus.
You know, and I think we need to really pat Mr. Bada on the back, because Dean is the one that the board says, can you find where that money's laying around? And then after we're done, Dennis turns to Dean and says, can you find them funds? So I think Dean does really a splendid job for the county, too.
I just want to respond to that. It's not just me. I mean, everyone, Linda's here, Bill's here, the sheriff and Nate were here, Jason, Jamel. All the departments really do a good job of staying within the funds that are budgeted. When there's a problem, they come to Dennis and myself. Chuck Lurchin will let us know here probably fairly soon that we need more money for the Veterans Burial Allowance. I don't do it on my own. I got very good support, but thank you.
All right. When I did my first budget, I was scared to death. Because there's just no way you can take this pile and make it fit that pile.
I was too.
but that was,
I was too, but that's because they told us we had 400,000 and we had
well, but that
less
was,
than that.
but that was 1979. so. Anything else?
Oh,
Motion to
public
adjourn.
comment?
Oh, I forgot about that. Anybody want to talk again? Mr. Porter's back.
He had the TV on
You
again.
still have to identify yourself.
John Porter, 4159, North Spider Lake Road. I think elected officials should do things different than what administrators do, and it has to do with sticking your neck out and putting your neck into a problem, and I'm here to pitch that authority idea again. But let me suggest I think it was probably January of 1981, I was newly elected supervisor in East Bay Township when I signed over the bill of sale for all of the fire equipment owned by East Bay Township. Signed it over to the authority that had been formed 20 days before I got into office. Well, I could say, well, I was new and, you know, maybe it was a mistake, or maybe it would work out. But, you know, I put my neck into it. I think it worked out. We didn't have all the answers of how it was all going to work, but one thing we did agree was we were going to work together. I'll give you another idea. I think July 4th was 233 years since the Declaration of Independence. That was an authority. It was 13 states sent their representatives to a meeting, and they all got together and they signed their names on this document that said they were going to work together. All the T's weren't crossed and the I's weren't dotted. They didn't know how the fund balance was going to be handled or what kind of reserves were going to be set up, but they knew they were going to work together. And there's something else that they knew, is if it didn't work out, everybody that signed that document was going to get hung. It's not a joke. That was what happened.
No, I know, I realize that.
And their families were going to lose their property. They're going to be out of luck. That was integrity. They stuck their necks out. I think we're in a community that, you know, you worry about going forward. You know, we want to worry about going forward. We just spent $10,000 to try to figure out what happened, what went wrong 6 years ago with the septic treatment plant. Well, I think you should put $15,000 up, some kind of a challenge grant towards an authority. If you can get somebody to match $15,000, be it public or private sources, to begin work on an authority for utilities, I think it'd be money well spent. And there's a tremendous savings in these utilities that you don't realize. Just think about GIS, Geographic Information System. Under all is the land. If you know where all the sewer and the water lines are in the land, I know you've got a good department, county equalization, they've got the property description layer, they've got, you know, they're trying to reconcile it with surveys. Everybody's got GIS. Every township's got GIS. The county's got GIS. See, we got the fire department here. They know where the hazardous materials are. They've got GIS. What about the utility department? Do they have GIS? We've got 2 electric utilities, local electric utilities. They've got GIS. Everybody's got GIS. And they've all got different machines, different programs, different people entering data. You consolidate this database into something that's worthwhile and everybody can contribute to, there's going to be tremendous savings. If somebody calls up this community and wants to relocate a business here in town, they want to know, well, what do you got for sewer and water? Well, what's the answer? Well, what township are you in? Well, I'm calling the Traverse City. So, well, Traverse City's got, 6 or 8 townships and a city. You got to find that township supervisor. You got to find the township planner and the zoning administrator, and then you got to put up an escrow to see what, if the township can study, what kind of utilities. Well, the people don't even know if they want to move to this town. Why would they put up an escrow? You get a unified GIS system with utilities and with all the community resources on one system, you've got answers for people. When they call up and they want to get into business in Traverse City, you got answers. You say, log on to this website. You get all the information you need about this community. It's not going to cost you. Well, I could go on. But I think it's time to look at an authority, seriously look at it. If you're here to solve problems, as opposed to just make sure the numbers work out at the end of the year, I think an authority is a good way to go. Thank you.
Anybody else? You're gonna put up the 15,000?
I don't know if it was GIS or that bad chicken, but I got her.
I'm glad you got your 88.
No, I just wanted to thank the board for their continued support for Metro, and I would ask that you do hold their feet to the fire, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at what's gonna come out of it. Thank you.
What would your name be?
Glenn Lyle.
I like doing that. That's more fun than, anybody else? How about a motion, public comment?
Yeah, just earlier this week, it seems to me that a couple commissioners did not agree with the prosecuting attorney's opinion about when I have to notify you as far as public notice when I'm doing work for projects within the county. Next week, I will be providing you a list of contractors and portions of the project at the Old Town parking deck that I have bid to 5 different contractors. I will provide you with a list of other projects that I've done. For example, the powder coating that I've done for a private manufacturer, a local manufacturer of the recycling bins on Front Street, and copies of the bids that I submitted this morning to the Downtown Development Authority for a powder coating of the trash receptacles that are downtown. The Brownfield, Grand Traverse County Brownfield funds are being contributed to the parking deck at Old Town. The prosecutor told me as long as this county board is not having anything to do with the bids, we don't have to notify you. But I heard him earlier this week saying that I didn't have to give you 7 days' notice to do the project at the Boardman Dam, and at least 2 commissioners did not agree with that, so they voted no. So with that, I will be providing you with that notification next week.
All right.
You know, I'd like to make one little comment about what was in the newspaper this morning, and how the county takes no leadership. And one of the items mentioned was the recycling in town. Well, where did the money come from for you to set up an authority in town and in Garfield Township? That kind of struck me as, duh.
Well, the recycling program downtown is also being funded through a mahogany grant that is provided by the Grand Traverse County Board of Public Works.
We did fund some money
A lot of money.
for them to form an authority. So, but we don't get any credit for leadership for that. It's a good thing I don't pay any attention to what they say. A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.